So COVID-19 pandemic has brought about a lot of changes in terms of the way businesses and employees operate. With more and more employees working from home and remote working, that obviously presents significant challenges to all businesses. It's not just me saying it, let's hear from our panel of experts. We have Morgan Cummins of TalentHub, we have Aiden Murray of Shannon Recruitment, we have Tracy O'Brien of The People Password, and we've Moji Akbari of Grouper Technology. Guys, thanks so much for coming and lending your advice, insights and tips for this new world that all employees are inhabiting and businesses are trying to work with. First off with you, Aiden, remote working, as we know, is completely the new norm. It's here possibly to stay for the foreseeable future. But what skills do you think that employees need to have in order to succeed in a digital landscape?
Well, our philosophy has always been people is your business and business is your people. And I suppose what we mean by this, when hiring people, you want people to represent your company. You want people to represent your brand. You want to mirror the values and the culture that you want to represent as a company. So I suppose as a foundation, you want to hire staff with a growth mindset, enthusiasm. I suppose people with the softer skills. The process that we go through when we're hiring for a company, we go through what's called a skills stock take. And what we mean by a skills stock take, we go and we discuss with the team leader what the short-term goals of the company is, what the medium-term goals and what the long-term goals are. And when we identify these, we look at what skill set is already within the team, and then what we need to go and hire. And I think this is a really good basis for what you're looking to hire. I suppose you mentioned the new normal there in your opening, Lorraine, and I suppose it's been really, really challenging to a lot of companies, but there's going to be an awful lot of advantages that are going to come of this also. Companies are going to look at that are located in areas of the country where their talent pool would have been very, very small, and they weren't necessarily open to people to hiring people to work remotely before. Now, I suppose they've really deepened the talent pool and left themselves open to hiring all types of people throughout the country. A new, smarter way of working. You're able to manage your time a little bit differently, in that where you might have spent a lot more time traveling to work and traveling to spend time with your clients. Now, I suppose it's all about optimization, I suppose.
Yeah.
And that's the key word in this. And to optimize is to evolve.
Some very good points there, Aiden. And I guess, Tracy, while Aiden has outlined that there are a number of challenges, there are also huge opportunities, especially for businesses and the kind of employees they're looking for. So what advice would you give businesses who are looking to train people in these kind of soft skills?
Thanks, Lorraine. Actually, it's a really good question. I think there's a lot of different options out there for organisations. So the traditional types of training. But I think what I see more and more happening now is organisations turning to coaching. Because one of the great things about coaching is you can use this to develop individuals or teams. And it's great for developing confidence in people. So people might do some traditional training, but then they need to develop confidence in the skills that they've learned. And coaching can really, really support that. And also helping people to apply what they have learned in other training. Another thing I've been working with a lot of clients on is setting up an internal mentoring program. Again, this is really cost effective for organisations, and it's great that people can learn from the experiences of others in their team. Also reverse mentoring, so it's not just about the longer serving person giving their experience to the more junior member of staff, but also vice versa. So it's really good for fostering relations across the organisation, maybe for people to get involved with each other who actually maybe not have seen each other when they were in the office at all, and now have this opportunity to spend some time online talking about things that they need to learn about and how to develop themselves. It's also a great way of supporting people through change. If you have somebody who's really comfortable in this new normal and somebody who isn't, then they can use their experiences to help support each other through the change. And again, something like mentoring or coaching, it's something that can be very regular. You can do it on a weekly basis or a monthly basis, whereas some of the more traditional training will be more ad hoc. And again, the likes of mentoring and coaching, It's all around professional and personal development, and it's a great way of building loyalty with your teams, which I think is even more important at this time, particularly as not all of them are on site with us.
That's some really, really good advice there. And I guess for lots of employees, they can't see they can't be what they can't see. And if leaders in businesses are going to take on the mantle when it comes to mentoring, I think that has huge benefits both for the employee, for the employer down the line. Morgan, there's been a lot of talk about a growth mindset. Can you tell us exactly what that is and how you identify it in somebody in the recruitment process, and how do people develop it if they don't have it?
Yes, Lorraine, growth mindset has actually been around for years. It's only really lately that it's popped up. The Irish rugby team, as you saw them being interviewed during all their successes, talked about being in the right mindset. Today I want to break it down because there's a lot of confusion around it, and I'll try and break it down into 3 to 4 simple points. Number one, it's actually realizing and believing in yourself, believing that you can actually develop your talents. And for the last few days, I've been trying to think of the best example I can give you. And I come back to something I struggled with over 10 years ago, which was actually what we're doing today, public speaking. I used to get really nervous, and I had a fixed mindset at that point in time 10 years ago, where I just told myself, I can't get better at this. And that's the second point. Growth mindset isn't just about having the mindset, it's about applying it. So you need to be able to put hard work behind the development. So what I did 10 years ago was join a local Toastmasters club and continue to go to that Toastmasters club twice a month for 5 years. But that is just one example of how you can develop a skill that you might have told yourself, or you might look at your team and say, those people can't be developed. The reality is they can, with good coaching, as Tracy had said. The next thing is to look at feedback. And we all, cringe when we get that critical feedback. But if you can start stepping back, seeing that feedback as a gift, and then understanding that that's going to actually improve whatever project you're working on. The next one, Lorraine, is looking at embracing your failures. And what's really relevant now is seeing the change as a challenge that's coming at you. And we're, as a human race, we aren't going through as much change as we ever had. Can you imagine in 1 year's time if you could say, this is what I did during this massive time of change, both to your people and maybe potentially in the future if you are looking for that next thing in your career. Lorraine, in terms of the hiring process, we here in TalentHub have been extremely fortunate over the last 6 months to hire over 30 people. A lot of those people have were made redundant at the start of the pandemic. The one thing that they all had in common was attitude. So Ray Dalio used to talk about this a lot in his book Principles, about hiring for attitude first, then skills and abilities. And now more than ever, you need to be looking out for that attitude. And the first place you should look within your company to see who has the right attitude, that growth mindset attitude I called out, and mold your interview around them. Bring that person into your interview in the chemistry section of it. You should be asking questions not only about what their best achievements are, but what did that person learn from them? How did they take feedback when they were given feedback? Then my 2 final things, Lorraine, is don't just look at the normal on a CV. Look for the unusual. And the unusual can be a passion project. It can be learning a new skill. It can be going back to college over the last number of years to retrain. Finally, I think where it will always show up a growth mindset is in the task, because we know in the e-commerce industry, the task is always set in the final stages of a process. But don't just judge on their strategic response, judge on their effort. Make sure you ask them what they learned and see how they take criticism as you give it to them when they're being interviewed.
Some super tips there, Morgan, and certainly make a difference to my life as well. So thanks so much for that. Really appreciate it. Moji, a lot of employees are starting to feel really disconnected from the workplace. And that's obviously brought about as a consequence of remote working. What systematic changes would you make, and what processes are out there that can assist in that very, very necessary human resource connection?
Very, very interesting question that I'd say in our engagement with the clients we are dealing with on a numerous amount of times to improve that. I suppose there are two ways to look at this. One element would be to start and embrace the technologies that they have and understand what are the drawbacks of them in an environment that the workforce are now no longer as part of that corporate network. They're outside that physical environment. And the other part would be to look into the processes that they have. They're very much tailored for individuals to be together in a physical environment. And now, with that inability, those processes need to be basically upgraded or revised. Think of the time that mobile devices were not a huge part of businesses 10 years ago. And then we've got processes and policies around bring your own device and mobile policies and all of those protection that needs to be basically be utilized and reviewed. So same goes with the current situation where we've got a technology stack. It's been very much tailored for an environment that would have been involved in a closed network without the necessity of looking outside that environment. But now we've got the necessity to extend that technology stack and look at a solution that would be able to be available and elastic for individuals outside that environment into their home. So there it comes the first instance where we need to look at what are the barriers and problems with that technology. Do we need to adopt new ones, or do we need to go through certain upgrades or make certain of those, if I can say, technology stacks defunct and basically invest in new ones? Or would it be the case that those technologies can be simply used with an add-on, which would be around the policies and processes and the ways that we've been doing our engagements in the past? We spoke, Lorraine, around the hiring process, and that was one of the main areas that I think Morgan was adopting in a very, very good way. The enabler that technology could bring, HR departments, for example, would be within that process of HR hiring aspects and onboarding aspect. In the past, there would have been a lot of different processes that entailed face-to-face meetings, engagement through other means rather than electronic means. Whereas now, this would be an opportunity to update those processes, move from post engagements or face-to-face engagements to electronic signature, for example, bringing that engagement of ice-breaking sessions in a manner that the individual that is going to be becoming part of the business would actually be able to introduce themselves to the team that they have never met in a different manner through a form, making sure that that's available. Similar aspect would be for the existing employees, that they would want to have a feedback, first of all, from their peers. That can be basically be adopted through electronic means. At the same time, anybody that joins the company, one of the main requirements or targets and goals that they would have is to improve their career development. As part of that, learning and development would be very difficult when it comes to not being in a physical environment. So enabling that online training is also, I think, one of the important challenges that can be adopted through technology with minimum cost. But the two views that I would share would be to look at the existing technology stack, try and audit and see what sort of benefits can be driven from other stacks that are out there not being utilized, and based on those, then improve the processes that would support these technologies, really.
Great, Moji. Thank you for that. Some great insights shared there. Aiden, creativity and productivity, they're two things that obviously are challenging both employees and employers at the moment as a consequence of remote working. How do you manage to maintain both of those in the workforce?
I suppose the old adage of 2 heads is better than 1, 3 heads is better than 1, and all these are used, I suppose, in problem solving and I suppose around a table of brainstorming that we would automatically do in our office environment from day to day. But I suppose the pandemic has created a certain set of circumstances and challenges that only really a pandemic can create. And that has meant everyone basically working from home. I suppose also the challenges with that is, I suppose, the normal interaction that you would have with your colleagues each day, where I suppose you're having coffee, you're chewing the fat, you're discussing different problems that you might be having in your work day to day, and you're supporting each other. So then it's trying to create a structure that mirrors this, which is very, very difficult. So I suppose what you're looking at is, I suppose, creating virtual coffee breaks, which has been useful. We're missing that normal interaction that you would have in an office where people feed off each other's body language. Look at us here today. We're doing a virtual presentation, and you're trying to feed off, I suppose, virtual body language, if that makes sense. But I think overall, this is a time that can be used to future-proof businesses as well. A new, smarter way of working, using your time better. The less time spent traveling can be used, I suppose, to generate new business leads. It can be used to work differently. But I think when we do get back to normal, we need to get the balance right between time spent in the office and time spent working remotely. Because as we said, creativity is definitely down, and you need heads in a room discussing problems. And that's how new technology is developed. That's how we solve our problems.
Thanks, Aiden. Tracy, company culture is obviously really, really important, and good companies have good cultures. But how do you maintain that? We've talked about productivity, we've talked about creativity with Aiden, but how do you maintain culture, company culture, when you're remote working?
Actually, Lorraine, you're absolutely right. I think culture is key to business success. And my view around culture is that it's very, very hard to change it. But if you're not managing it and minding it, it can evolve. And particularly in times of difficulty and change, it can actually erode. So it's really, really important that you do mind it. And I think things that companies can do to do this is to actually think about their culture, and do they actually know what their culture is? So maybe now is a time to just revisit things like your vision, your mission, and your values, because they're the bedrock of your company culture. To make sure that it's still relevant for today's world, and also a chance to remind your colleagues and your teams of what your mission, your vision, your values are. I think as well, maybe time to revisit what the qualities of your culture are, and particularly thinking about pre-COVID world, what was great about your culture, how agile were you, what was well-being like, how much collaboration was there. So what are those qualities like now, and how would you like them to be, so that you can start to build a path towards ensuring that your culture is maintained. And then something I would always say to people is ask your people. Just ask people what they think. What would they like to see more of? What are they missing that they had before that they don't see within the culture now? And is there some inventive ways of bringing those back into the organisation? So if you think back to the beginning, I remember when people would say, virtual coffee break, no way, I'm not interested. And actually we're all doing it now. So again, it's just trying new things, giving it a go to make sure that their culture is protected. And the last point I'd make around culture is when we're inducting new people. So we've talked about bringing people into our organisations and looking for the growth mindset. But I think it's really important in our induction and onboarding process that we're talking about our culture, that we're capturing for these new people what we want our culture to continue to be, and that we're talking about culture more than we ever would before, to make sure that the culture that we want is staying alive and relevant.
And I think what you've just mentioned there about asking your employees what it is they want, at the moment, a lot of them would say that they're burnt out. How do companies deal with that?
It's very, very true, Lorraine, and there's been quite a few studies on this. Most recent one is UL, where they found that 60% of Irish employees are more stressed now than they were before. And there was an earlier study back, I think in April of this year, where Irish Jobs looked at, again, how people were feeling, and 21% of people back in April said that they were finding it difficult to switch off. So I think it's really important for any employer to make sure that their people know what the expectations are, and that they make sure that they have manageable workloads. I think with e-presenteeism, people are really concerned that because they're not in the office and being seen, that they need to be logging on at particular times. And I've heard stories of people logging on at different times to send a few emails to make it look like they're working, but they're actually just putting extra pressure on themselves. So it's really important that if managers see people with late night emails, or they think that people maybe aren't taking breaks, that they remind them that it's okay to do this, and that the expectation isn't that they're available all of the time. I also think as human beings, we need to have autonomy and control over our work lives. So just to make sure that we're not taking away control from people, trust them to do the right thing, trust that they can actually do the work and remain productive and creative. Again, look at your culture and make sure that your culture is one around well-being and the support for people. And particularly my last point would be that home working isn't for everybody. I personally love it, but not everybody does. So to just ask your people who don't maybe like home working, what support do they need to help them through all of this? And lean on each other so that when we come through all of this, everybody's in a better place and feeling much safer psychologically, and that their well-being has been supported.
Thank you, Tracy. And that brings me nicely on to TalentHub, to Morgan. Morgan, how do you promote well-being within the workplace now, given that everyone's working remotely?
Yeah, thanks, Lorraine. And some of the stats there that Tracy shared are really worrying. Mental health now is so important, and for every leader, every person listening today, we have a shared responsibility for our people's mental health. I learned this morning that 25 people committed suicide over the last week, and just think about that for a second. Like that's just it's so sad that that's happening, and burnout is one of the things that's causing that. I'm also very mindful though that budgets are really tight, and we're in the middle of potentially a big recession. So having budgets to spend in L&D practices, wide-ranging ones, aren't there. So today I just wanted to focus on 4 key areas that I believe you can do without any experts coming into your business. And so number 1, Lorraine, is communication, but communication with engagement. And it was mentioned previously about really listening, being open and honest, asking your people how they are and if they need help. The best live example I can provide the listeners today with is a CEO client of mine who admitted 4 weeks into the first lockdown how much he was struggling. And he told me the emails then he got from his people, and he's a company of over 100 people, was remarkable. And he was then able to have proper engagement with these team members, as opposed to where we all get a little bit lazy when it comes to communication. We think that the group Zoom call is going to be enough. A person's never going to open up to you in a group situation. They weren't doing it in a boardroom. Why would they do it on Zoom? So as leaders, you've got to really work extra hard. You should be actually doing check-in calls with your people at least every 2 days, because that's going to lead on to showing them that you actually care, that you really care, and that you're showing empathy for them, and that you should be trying to walk in their shoes. Another thing that I think we've totally lost sight of during this is celebrating those little wins, not like the big wins of hitting the monthly target, and that's increasingly more difficult now, but actually celebrating the little wins. And remember, a little goes a long way. Another client of mine gave Just Eat vouchers to their team on one of those hot weekends where everyone was thinking about doing different things for their weekends. And the feedback she told me she got was amazing, like in terms of just that goodwill equity that came back from that. And again, those things don't cost a business very much, and they can be expensed back into a business, in fact. Finally, Lorraine, and again, it was touched on greatly by Tracy, I'm seeing businesses and societies set up mentoring programs over a 6-month period. And again, mentoring our buddy system can be something that's done really effectively without any costs associated. And it's giving that chance again to listen and help develop your people at this critical time.
Thanks, Morgan, for that. And that really brings us to an end where it comes to the digital skills space. But I guess, given that we have a compliance expert here on the panel in Moji, I think it would be remiss of me not to ask, what can you do to safeguard your online business, Moji? What tips would you give some of the retailers, e-tailers and businesses that are watching here today?
That's an amazing question. As you know, Lorraine, regulations change from time to time, and that's for a reason, to make sure that there's better support and better value towards the consumer at the end of the day, and there's no concern around that engagement of delivering service to those consumers. When we move away from controlling that data, which is owned by a business, and we allow access to that data, which is basically very, very important to anybody that would basically have that data. When we are allowing that data to be accessed from anywhere throughout the world, we do need to make sure that there's processes and there's exact approaches in place where we could ensure any future, let's say, lack of engagement through those details in there, and making sure that the data is safe and secure. When it came down to GDPR, that was really one of the difficult challenges we felt here at Grouper. Our clients are basically facing to deliver. But as things went along, that became an enabler to fine-tune the way the business is being basically supported and the way it's being secured. So one of the things that needs to happen is to look at those data protection aspects primarily, making sure that we have the visibility of the reason for individuals for the access. So it would be a legitimate reason for accessing that data. There's legitimate access at the same time, where there would be structured reviews, logs in place in terms of why did we basically use that level of access at certain levels. And obviously there's new regulations coming on board. For example, just in next month, October 5th, we've got the Irish Data Protection Commission enforcing a cookie allowance for certain websites. That if we are basically adopting digital business online, we need to make sure that the websites are now adhere to those compliances that are there for a reason. Again, enable the end user to have that capability to decide whether they'd like that data to be shared or no. And that's really important to make sure and be mindful of those specific regulations to be adhered to. In the past, when we were more in a corporate and not digital world, we could basically easily adopt them throughout a certain level of time. But we now deal with live data. Those live data are in danger of breach by certain companies that they like to basically contain personal data. We need to make sure that there's adequate processes are in place. And the only way that we can actually ensure that's in compliance with the regulation is to apply that regulation to our ways of working and business operations.
Super. Thank you so much, Moji, for that. Thank you, Tracy. Thank you, Aiden. And thank you, Morgan. That has been a lot of insight into the challenges that a lot of businesses are currently experiencing, and indeed employees at the moment. We've covered a lot around growth mindset, culture, creativity, productivity, the processes that can be put in place. And I think that people will really benefit from that today. Thanks all.